the business cycles.
The definition of persona is the aspect of someone's character that is presented to or perceived by others. The great psychologist Carl Jung referred to the persona as an individual's social facade or front, which reflects the role that the individual is playing in a certain context. As human beings, it's natural to have adaptive personas which change with the environment we're in. One might play the role of mother to your children, but also have personas for being a wife, daughter, sister, friend, boss, or coworker. Each of these roles requires different aspects of who you are and also have different norms associated with them. For example, maybe you and your friends from college go away for a guy's weekend every year. I'll bet you're going to act differently with them than with your kids when you get home. Personas are like outfits. They are front-facing, situationally appropriate, and the outer layer which sits between your real self and the rest of the world. Consider the different roles you play in your life and how you might bring forward or hide different aspects of yourself given different situations. Now imagine yourself sitting at your desk, signing into a Zoom call with your boss. Which persona participates? Is this something you think about, or does it just happen naturally? Have you ever found yourself oversharing at work, or maybe disclosing something that you felt uncomfortable about afterwards? But people don't really talk about this. It seems disingenuous or even manipulative, but it's actually something we all do very naturally and often without much conscious intervention. There's an opportunity here for you to proactively design your professional avatar and make a conscious decision to embody this persona during work hours. This will make you more effective and even mitigate some risks. Now, you're probably saying, Mary, I have 23 years experience and I'm an expert in blah, blah, blah. How can creating a fake work persona make me even more effective? The reason why is that experience and expertise are only part of the equation to career success. Also important is your professional appearance and behavior, and that's where persona comes in. In my advisory business, I coach executives, many of whom are mid-career and have been recently surprised by a layoff, reorganization, or who have hit a wall in their ascension up the ladder. In some cases, what was holding these smart people back was more about personal behavior and how they were perceived than their experience or know-how. Your professional avatar is a key part of your brand, which is critical to both short-term and long-term success. It's also the security perimeter between your personal life and the gig that pays you money to support it.
Speaking from my direct personal experience, I'm very comfortable and informal, but even that is its own persona. Now, as an executive and as a woman, it's important to establish authority and not leave yourself open to some very specific vulnerabilities, specifically the ones that relate to conveying the weakness of needing to be liked. It's actually a bit of relief to me and comes surprisingly naturally to be direct and relatively flat in my affect. The part I need to manage is the response to it. So when people see me as the big boss, sometimes it's hard to adjust and for me to navigate because I'm not particularly keen on authority and the necessary distance it creates in human connection. So I believe that many dynamics in sales benefit from authenticity and even disclosure that lacks a certain amount of polish. It signals honesty, but at a certain point, establishing trust with a client involves showing them that you take the task at hand seriously and have the ability to deliver and the maturity to take accountability if things go wrong. You have to know the difference between what opens a door and what gets a deal done. So one example is a rep I used to work with early in my career as a district trainer. And what that means is I was essentially a peer tasked with developing other reps in my region. So there was this guy who was like super silly and lovable. What should we call him, Mary?
Um, wow, that's so hard. Chris, let's call him Chris.
Yeah. The doctor's offices loved Chris, but they didn't respect him. They called him the Candy Man because he brought them snacks, but they wouldn't let him see the doctor. So he'd be hanging out in the back office, gossiping with the staff, but rarely talking to the prescribers. And when I gave him the feedback that he needed to start leveraging his relationships and asking for access to the doctors, after all, that was the job, he said to me, "Do you know what they call you? Pushy Katie." And I think he expected me to be upset about that. And at the time, it probably did hurt my feelings. But my response had been, at the time, I said, "Chris, do you know what they call me on my team? Number one." And that was the reason. And that's the reason I was in the trainer position. So I don't remember much about him beyond that. But what I've observed over the years is that when you present as kind of the friendly clown or act overtly flirty, just because it's comfortable for you, because it feels kind of like right and natural, it's hard to walk that back to be taken seriously when it matters. There's quite a bit of nuance to this, granted, but ultimately it's pretty straightforward.
Wow, it's a great example. I love it. Um, I've definitely known a few Mr. Clowns for a few Chris's in my time.
The Candy Man.
Um, yeah. And by the way, I've actually given candy at work, so this like my right mind, I'm like trying to respond, but I'm also trying to like, all right, I'm gonna put that to the side and deal with that later. But your feedback that funny and silly or whatever can go too far and impact credibility. And I'm kind of picturing him bringing the office managers and the nurses candy and like envisioning this as like a fawning behavior, and
Yeah.
how maybe he thought that this would be received just like just be nice. Maybe like that was his attempt at a persona of sorts. And like there's like almost a childlike quality to it in a way, right? Like giving friends candy and
Absolutely.
small gifts. Like maybe the schoolyard lesson for him had never been adapted to a more professional context. And it's interesting how he responded to you, because it gives a clue to his motivation and conflict, right? He's like, well, see, the office staff like perceived you as pushy, which clearly scares the hell out of him, right? Like
Oh, that's so perceptive.
he needs the access, but he lacks the confidence to confront the discomfort of another perceiving him as too assertive, of being like a bad boy in a way, right? So he's like providing treats to be liked and as an offer of exchange for what he really wants. That's an awesome story.
That is so perceptive of you, by the way, because I think that's it that mirrors itself, over so many examples throughout my career, as watching folks really struggle with the balance between needing to be liked, which is
Yeah,
something that extends outside of your professional needs, but like winds up overlapping with, and the ability to get things done. And in sales, you're not a customer service person, you're
right.
performing a very specific need.
And by the way, if we can continue, because this was such an awesome example, I have so many other things like percolating in my mind. But so while I've done actually, I have been candy in the workplace.
So have I.
But
So have I.
also, I remember I was new to a big financial institution where there was a lot of history, and I kind of knew the history, but I was like the new person. And I remember our first leadership team meeting, I brought like a giant box of croissants. And I think that also comes from maybe there's a wanting to be liked in it, but it was also this nurturing. It was like this, like, which I think as women, we can sometimes naturally fall, and not it's not a bad thing, right? Nurturing is a good thing, but not necessarily in that role at that job in that context. Was like, oh, I want to feed everyone. It's like it's a morning meeting, and so like look what I picked up on the way. And I think as women, especially women in certain positions and at certain levels of their career, you need to be careful about that, because we're kind of fighting against those. Being automatically identified as that. And what's coming to mind is a story one of our audience members told me about, coaching a woman who, would respond to, oh, I'll take notes. Like when there wasn't an assistant in the room or
Yeah.
something like that, or can you get the door? Can you do whatever? And just like, you want to be liked, you want to be helpful, and it's great to be liked and helpful and a team player. You just need to be careful where it's coming from and what it might telegraph to others.
Yeah, it's so much about what it means to make a strong first impression, right? So it's like you bring the croissants because there's like, this sense of I want to like walk in the room and immediately sort of make a positive
Mhm.
like, impression. And I think that this is where a lot of socialization winds up actually working against us as women. I will say that the thing about taking notes, I will patently say no. Like I will absolutely not
I
take
do.
notes.
I
And
do. I hate taking notes.
I actually like taking them, but I
Do
won't
you?
signal the fact that like being sort of playing these like sort of conventional, um, submissive, roles. Even things like, well, you pick that up. I won't. It's like
No.
where
Yeah.
it's just like even if there's something that's like there's trash in the room that would be like really easy to pick up and throw in the trash.
Hmm.
And no, opening door that no, and it's uncomfortable, but it's like this goes back to the thing that's like, well, okay, so in the language and the sort of parlance or whatever of business, it's transaction, and it really has to do with making a strong impression. Is a lot of times it's being blank faced. Like it's literally the power of what that does to people psychologically is not giving them anything to read,
Listen.
and how that impacts how they interface with you, and like it kind of surfaces their own like projection and their own issues, but it doesn't really give them very much to chew on. So you hold the power for being able to manage the dynamic. So yeah.
And this is what we're
No.
talking about today, personas. This is why this isn't easy to do, right? This is not easy. Everything you're saying, absolutely brilliant, but like that's not, we're automatically, it's just, you're going to just, do these
Yeah, and
things. And
that harks back to sort of what I referred to earlier, which was saying that it's like I can do it, but it's still hard to
oh
manage
yeah,
the response to it. So I still feel the fact that it's a departure from how I like to typically interact in my life. But I also understand, to our point of playing the persona, the importance, especially as you begin to have ascend in an organization, and it's really ultimately a responsibility to be able to do the best for your organization, your team, your people. So you need to have the respect. You need to have a little bit of the fear of within the organization for you, so you can get things done. It's that thing where it's like yeah, first you do it, and then you have to deal with the fact that the response isn't like you're friendly, like thanks for the croissant. It's like like it can be a very cold exit from that
by
meeting
the
room when
way,
you're doing it right.
I just, last thing, no one had any of the croissants. There wasn't one person ate, not one person ate a croissant. I
Ooh,
probably
great.
brought 12 of them. Whew. I kind of want a croissant. I want a cronut. That's what I really want.
I want like 12 croissants right now.
Hang tight, psychos. We'll be right back. I view careers as taking part in 3 acts. 1, discovery and experience. 2, expertise development. And 3, adaptive value creation. I'll get into all of that later on, but I wanted to mention it relative to a brilliant mentor of mine who was in the third act of his career when I had the luck of working for him. The context is important. This man, who I'll call Bob, held a C-suite role at a large global firm. He was both effective and likable. Being in the third act, his job was to be adaptive to any and all change and to create value for the firm beyond his comp. The day I accepted a job working for Bob, he called me into his office to shake my hand and wish me luck. I recall I said something to him, a compliment or something about how his employees were receiving something he had recently talked about. And he smiled and said, "Mary, as you progress in your career, the more people will tell you how great you are." There was a vulnerability in the moment, though I can't point to exactly how I knew this. I just felt it. I've held COO or chief of staff roles for most of my career. The primary skills in these roles have been discretion, loyalty, and the ability to be the architect and executor of my leader's most important strategic initiatives. These roles required me to work formally on behalf of my leader and speak or write or represent them as they would themselves. Bob was charismatic and likable. He gave off a really warm, genuine vibe. When I interacted with him, I felt seen, valued, cared for, and respected. I saw a kind, intelligent, and strong man. But I was also very conscious that I was interacting with Bob's work avatar and not Bob himself. I felt as though Bob was intentional in creating this persona and that it had served him very, very well. If you could use AI to design an ideal boss, Bob would come pretty close. Now, I did see him react pretty intensely to things now and then, but at his level, it was absolutely necessary. He did not suffer fools, a style which telegraphed his strengths as much as it inspired people to do their best for him. Persona isn't just your expertise or experience. Now, I'm not suggesting that the good parts of Bob's persona were opposite to his real self. Personas aren't the opposite of your true nature. They are inspired by the best and most appropriate aspects of yourself and others, curated into a singular whole. It's construct developed to serve your best interests.
That last couple of sentences, I feel like could just be the entire podcast episode. For me, this example that you've provided, it points back to the role of emotional regulation and even self-awareness in professional development. Specifically, that flattery really only works on people who don't have conscious command of themselves. And it works especially well on people who demand or crave validation. So when staff compliment or flatter me, the more experienced I become, the less susceptible I am to the manipulation. But it's a work in progress. And in a previous episode, I talked about an example where I was only able to see the impact in hindsight. But in the example you provided, Bob returns the serve without creating any embarrassment and establishes his command in a brilliant and polished manner. I think there's a subconscious comfort to knowing someone has the ability to remain kind, clear-headed, and in control, when that person is your boss at work.
Hey, fellow psychos, if you enjoyed the show, please click like, subscribe, and share it with other psychos you know. We'd also love to hear from you, so please hit us up on our socials. We're at Business Psychos Pod on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.